Instead, I'm going to tell a story about myself. When I first started programming, the first language I started with was C++, and needless to say, it was a difficult entrance. I would fight with memory, I would fight with the compiler. I spent all day frustrated, and all I could think is I wasn't smart enough or I didn't understand enough about programming. And so I would go off and read like, okay, I don't know the right design patterns. I don't know the grand unified theory that makes me good at this thing because it's too hard and I'm not going to be successful. And then I read Joel on software. And what I got out of it was that it's actually really hard and nothing really makes it easier. It's just a whole bunch of real problems that you have to tackle individually. And I think that changed my career from thinking of searching out some better way to do things to listening to the ways things were going wrong around me, which I think is the spirit of craft. And so I think that I really credit Joel for being one of the first people to really teach me what craft and software is like. So let's welcome Joel Spolsky.
Work this thing. Here we go. Okay, welcome. Thanks for, this is so fancy here. It's like a bank. I'm used to working in startups. I have, I'd like you to notice that not only do I have water, but I have two different brands. This is why terrorists hate us. Anyway, not really. How many, I'm here to talk about Stack Overflow mostly I want to talk about. That's what I work on all day long. So first question, has anybody ever been to Stack Overflow? If so, please raise your hands. Okay, 1, 2, 3. No, keep them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, let's say 6. Awesome. That was actually a little bit of a kind of story there. We started Stack Overflow is now almost 10 years old. I started it in the year 2008 when a blogger named Jeff Atwood, his blog was called Coding Horror. We'll get back to that. He emailed me and said, hey, I'm thinking of just being a full-time blogger, and you're a blogger, so I wanted to get your advice. And I said, actually, I got a better idea. And I had this idea of a Q&A site to try to destroy Experts Exchange. Anybody here old remember Experts Exchange? Scroll all the way down or just pay for it. So that was our mission in life. One of these days they're going to find me and they're going to beat me. But our mission in life was let's just replace that, and we had to figure out how to pay for the servers, and I had this idea of just putting a little job listing thing in the corner, which is kind of what we did in that Stack Overflow, and that would pay for the servers. I didn't anyway. So I said, Jeff, I can't get anybody here at Fog Creek to work on this particular problem. They're all very excited about the next version of FogBugs. Do you want to do this with me? And you can write the code. And he liked that idea. Eventually came around to doing it. Like I said, Coding Horror was his blog name. In retrospect, it might not have been the best idea to have him write the code, but I was willing to be I was the idea horror. And honestly, his code was fine. It's okay. And we launched the site eventually. It took us, he kept saying it's going to take 6 to 8 weeks, and so it took 16 weeks, I think it took 4 months. So only double. And when it launched, it was still actually in beta, and I tried it out on the very first day. I was like, I got to see if this works. And I just thought of the last programming problem I had, which was how to take some text that somebody has typed and find the URLs and make them into hyperlinks. And so I needed a regular expression that can identify a hyperlink in text. And I had a regular expression that I thought was good, but whenever the URL was the last thing in a sentence, then there was a period, and a period is legal in a URL, but it's not a part of the hyperlink. And so I had to solve this particular problem. So I started typing this question on Stack Overflow version 0.00000 on day 1. It had been out for hours. And a little thing popped up and said, oh, is this your question? And it had a list of similar questions. And one of them was exactly what I was about to ask already on the first day, because 30,000 people came on the first day. And I clicked on that, and it had been asked, and it had been answered. And it had been answered by 4 different people. And there had been a lot of voting. And the best answer was already at the top. So I kind of saw with amazement the very first time I tried Stack Overflow, all of the mechanics that we had designed for Stack Overflow were like already working, and not only that, but like we threw them out into the world and they started working. So the site grew really, really fast after that. I remember these numbers because I would write a blog on Joel and Software, and I got 30,000 visitors a day, which is a lot. I would write a blog post and get maybe 500,000, but I would get 30,000 a day. And Stack Overflow got 30,000 the first day, and 60,000 the second day, and 90,000 the third day, and kind of never really went down from that and continued going up until it took over the entire universe, and now we're all gray goo. So at some point, like within about 3 or 4 months, Microsoft noticed us, and only partially because we were using ASP.NET for some reason. And they said, hey, we got a party, conference thing, whatever going on in Las Vegas. Why don't you come talk about Stack Overflow and how you built it using ASP.NET MVC? So I thought, how bad could that be? I've spoken to rooms with tens of people before. How bad could it be to go speak at a conference in Las Vegas? And we went out there, and it turns out, have you been to Las Vegas? It's at the Venetian. So this is a hotel. This hotel is so big. This is the kind of hotel that other hotels stay at when they go on vacation. It's enormous. We got to the ballroom where our talk was taking place, which was the main room, and it was like the size of Ireland, approximately. Just this mass sea of people all looking at us. They told us afterwards, 5,000 people sitting in that room, all getting ready to kill us with their eyes. And Jeff and I were backstage, we're hanging out, and there's a bunch of little Microsoft people organizing the conference, and like stand there and smile here and don't walk there, and here's where your mic and blah, blah, blah. And we're getting more and more nervous as time goes on. At some point, I looked over to Jeff and I said, you know what, I'm going to ask them how many people have been to Stack Overflow. And Jeff was like, no, you cannot ask that question. There's probably like 4 people in there who have ever been to Stack Overflow. Do you want, no, 2. There's probably 1 people in there. There's probably 0 people in there who have ever been to Stack Overflow. Joel, do you want -4 people to raise their hands when you ask this question? And I'm peeking around the scrim, or whatever you call the thing behind the stage that they have at the real conferences. And there's like literally 5,000 people. It's just as far as the eye can see, it's just dots, just pixels of human beings. And so we went up on stage, and it wasn't so bad. So I said, hey, how many of you use Stack Overflow or have been to Stack Overflow? And I looked over at Jeff. He's like sending me the complete death stare. But actually, it was not so bad. And like 1 out of 3 people raised their hands, and we were astonished. This was on the 4th month, I think. And he was actually pretty impressed. And that's when Jeff told me he finally believed what I had been telling him from the beginning, which is like, oh yeah, every programmer in the world is going to use this just sort of automatically. That was also, by the way, the last time I could actually ask that question without people just laughing. Like you don't bother raising your hands anymore, right? It's like, hey, okay, gravity. How many people here use gravity? It's just sort of too obvious. Okay, so what can I tell you about Stack Overflow that's sort of interesting? Most people do not type words onto Stack Overflow. We call those people highly engaged users. Most people are drive-by users. They type something into Google and they land on Stack Overflow. That's 50 million human beings a month. 50 million? Yeah. Over the number of people that actually participate is somewhere around 100,000 a month that answer a question. I don't know how many people ask. It seems infinite. There's about 8,000 questions a day. You can figure that out. 100,000 people are kind of on there all the time answering questions, and there's sort of a long tail. But the number 1 user answering questions on Stack Overflow is John Skeet. Has anybody heard this name? John, yes, we know him. I should say a big round of applause for John Skeet. He has a 1 million reputation on Stack Overflow, which is really kind of crazy. He works for Google. He's a C# programmer, also knows Java very well, has written books about them, and apparently also world's expert on time zones, because that's all he does. He does the time zone support in Google Calendar. When you have a bug there, that's John. One of his most popular, I kid you not, one of his most highly upvoted answers on Stack Overflow was somebody said, hey, I tried to do this little particular thing, and I took like 8 a.m., and then I subtracted 7 a.m., and I got 53 minutes. what's going on? And he said, oh, that must be 1927 in Shanghai time zone because they went back by 7 minutes or something in 1927, but only in Shanghai. And this was not a setup. He actually knew that. He also, that's a true fact. Another thing about John Skeet is that he can divide by 0, so that's very helpful. He has answered 36,000 questions on Stack Overflow. That's a ridiculous amount. He does it whilst commuting to work. He lives in Reading. He has to take a train to London every day, and so he sits there on the train and answers them. We have this little calculation on Stack Overflow of like how many people have you helped, and it's the number of people that read your question and scrolled all the way, divided by something, some factor that we have for whether or not an answer is helpful. And we also have another estimate from sort of independent research that the average. So he's helped 230 million, he's helped developers 230 million times. The average person that is helped on Stack Overflow, we estimate, probably saves about a half an hour. If they hadn't found that answer, they would have spent another half hour debugging or searching elsewhere. And so my calculation is that there are 20 million professional developers in the world. So those 230 million times that he helped them, it means that he has helped each and every one of you, if you're developers, on average, just one person, 11 times. So based on that half hour, that's about 5 hours. Now, I know some of you spent that time on Reddit, so it's complete waste, but that's your fault. That's on you. That is not John Skeet's fault. He's really kind of made the world better in the sort of massive scale of helping all those people that came later. I'm really happy about that. I don't know when he's going to stop. I was speaking at a conference in Norway, and we happened to be on the same flight. And when you get off the plane, there's like a moving walkway that takes you to the immigration where they're going to stamp your passport. And I saw John Skeet gets on this moving walkway, does a little calculation, and he's like, well, it's probably about 45 seconds here. So he pulls out his laptop and opens it and gets on the Google VPN and starts coding. And before we got to the end of the moving walkway, he's like, oh, good, I think that's fixed. And he fixed a bug related to time zones in Saudi Arabia or something. And all I could think is like, I don't know if I've ever written code standing up, let alone on a moving walkway before immigration. I probably wouldn't even bother. Still, John Skeet is only 0.1% of all the people on Stack Overflow that are answering questions. There are 100,000 people answering them every day, and those people are really making the internet awesome for the 50 million programmers in the world. So that's the story of like it's very hard to tell the story of Stack Overflow without introducing it kind of as this massive act of generosity by the people that participate. Even asking questions is helpful if they're good, reusable questions. Another thing I get asked when I try to talk about Stack Overflow, especially to non-developers, is, hey, are you going to make one for doctors? Or like, why do we have Stack Overflow for developers? Why do you need this even? What's wrong with programming? I mean, we don't have a Stack Overflow for heart surgeons. I just had heart surgery, by the way, a year ago. I had open heart surgery, and I'm fine. Thank you for asking. And can you imagine if your heart surgeon was sort of sitting there during the surgery, like using, what would he call it, cardio overflow? No, it would have to be, Stack Overflow is a book, so it would be like myocardialinfarction.com or something. And, I mean, what would they just like, do, and like, what's that thing? Like, nurse, scalpel, that's a little flappy thing over there next to the left ventricle. Let's look this up. It looks like it's a mitral valve or something. Okay. Does he need it? I don't. Unlike surgeons, we have long since given up on any pretense of knowing what we are doing as developers. As developers, the pretense does not exist. We just start hammering out code with as I say, hammers and anger. Before, roll up our sleeves and just start typing things, and then things go wrong, and then we Google them, and hopefully that will keep up with our... Has anybody read a book lately? I'm actually wondering if... No, not a book about, design patterns. I mean, like a book about how to do things. We have no pretension of that. There is no documentation. I never read documentation. There is absolutely no purpose. I used to actually read the documentation. There was a time. Today, most documentation is awful, and when you do read it, you're kind of sorry for wasting the time that, I mean, imagine, all right, the documentation, what is it? Like if there were documentation on Node.js, for example, which there isn't, but let's say there were, you kind of open the book and you're like, all right, what's the first thing? I guess I should create a Node project. How do you create a Node project? Creating a Node project. Number one, turn on your computer. Okay, so far so good. The documentation always starts out right somehow. If your computer is sleeping, wake it up. Some computers distinguish between sleep mode and hibernate mode. Okay, why is this even here? Just like a lot of nonsense. Shows up in documentation that is all technically correct. Step 2, make sure that the computer is in front of you and that the keyboard is under your hands. If you do not have hands, see Appendix 2.3.4. Appendix 2.3.4 is not available in North Korea, Iran, Libya, or Canada. Again, who cares? All right, step 3, now we're getting somewhere. Step 3, create the Node project. That's all it usually says. And then you sort of wonder if this was like somebody's homework assignment, like my 12-year-old nephew doing a history homework assignment. And they're like, hey, write about, what was the assignment that he had? Create a, what was the impact of the Cold War in Europe? Well, the Cold War in Europe was very impactful because unlike the Warm War or the Hot War, it was lower in temperature. And so it had a great impact on Europe. And then he could write that way for 3 pages. And that's what our idiot documentation is usually like, as somebody who does not know how to do the thing. They're kind of faking it. So yeah, my 12-year-old nephew got a job as a documentation writer. I, for one, tend to tear up the documentation, throw it in the trash, set the trash on fire, and then just Google it on Stack Overflow. And that's where it came from. Now, the other thing about documentation is, Paul was talking about how he started with C++. I started with C. This is the part where I say, you kids have it easy. You're using these programming languages where things are defined, and the actual thing that is going to happen is always defined. I am so old. Let me tell you how old I am. When I checked into the hospital a year ago, they told me that my blood type had been discontinued. That's how old I am. When I learned, sorry, that's not my joke. When I learned how to program, I learned C. And in C, almost everything is undefined. In fact, if you make an error of the type that you would never know that you were making, the actual behavior is undefined. And what the old C gurus used to say is, demons might fly out of your nose, and that would be perfectly acceptable. So if you fail to initialize a variable, for example, you don't get any kind of error message. That is not actually an error. You have to use a special error program called lint to find out. I'm serious. Go Google that. Nasal demons. That's a real thing. and it'll tell you that story. Usually you just get sort of a not particularly surprising crash. What I think would be a fun hobby, and one of the things I want to do someday, is create a compiler that took advantage of this gigantic loophole to be a little bit malicious, I guess. Not in a surprising way. So here's some of my ideas. I've written them down. Number one, if you fail to initialize a variable, what happens now is you get whatever number happened to be stored in that memory location beforehand, although there's ways to make it 0, but you get some random number that you wanted. On mine, we're actually going to modify the rest of your code so that we do initialize it to 0, but afterwards, every time you store a number in that variable, I'll like subtract 1 or something just to drive you crazy. Number 2, another favorite undefined thing that happens if you try to dereference a null pointer, the behavior is undefined, or really any pointer that doesn't point to a real thing. Usually you just get a crash, which is nice. But my compiler, I'm going to call it the asshole compiler, by the way. That's my name for it. If you dereference a null pointer, I'm going to delete your Facebook account. I think that is legal. That complies with the C spec. And finally, if you index something that is beyond an array, which also usually just gets you random numbers depending on how far you go, sometimes will crash your program. It's going to order an Uber, and it's going to post dirty pictures to Instagram. So that is my plan for the asshole C compiler, and it's legal, and it's 100% C compliant. How many, so of the people in this room, I don't know, I see a whole bunch of Soc Gen people here. how many of you work in sort of a corporate / professional programming environment, I guess? Versus how many of you are sort of like indie startup game, iOS games, right? So this is the dream, right? Like this is what everybody wants to be doing. This is sort of the fun thing. You can sit at home, you can drink your hot cocoa, you can have your cat on your lap while you code. You can make some kind of a cool app. You can put it in the app store. You don't have to know how to program. You can just use Stack Overflow. Just guess, cut and paste. And of course, the problem with that is instead of a boss, you have users, these like human beings who have paid $1.99 for your stupid app. And no matter how good your app is, you then have to read the reviews from these users on the App Store. I mean, you could make an app that literally cured baldness. I don't know how it would work, but I mean, I guess it would have something to do with undefined behavior in C. But you could literally cure baldness, and what do you think your rating would be, your average rating on the App Store for this $1.99 miracle app? It would be 3.4, like all the other. And the reviews would be like, wow, this ad took 10 minutes. It's like, it's an okay app, but it's not my favorite app, so I'm going to only give it 2 points. I feel like ripped off. I had a friend in the early days of the App Store. He wrote this app called Ruler Phone, and this was kind of cool. Here's how it works. You held up a credit card, something you wanted to measure. You held up a credit card and took a picture, and then you showed it what you wanted to measure. And now all credit cards are exactly the same size, so it would do like a little multiplication or whatever, and it would tell you how big the thing was that you held up the credit card. Next to it was kind of cute, and he was having fun with this little app, and he was making like $1,000 a month or something, plus whatever he could charge on the credit cards. But anyway, the reviews, not true. The reviews he got were usually things like, I didn't use it, 1 star. And like, I don't know what he's supposed to do about that. My favorite review that he got was, worst game ever. Which is my next hobby after I finish the Asshole C compiler, is to log on to the App Store and review all kinds of serious apps as if they were games, like you're like Uber. It's like, I couldn't get past level 1. Kept trying to kill the cars and nothing happened. So I was sort of stuck there. But that probably will be my retirement, will be programming, I guarantee you, either on the compiler or the App Store, because I really love programming, and the part I love about programming the most is that moment of being in the zone. I don't know if we've talked about this today, but the zone is that state that you're in where, for whatever reason, somehow like the world falls away and it's just you and the code and you're just typing and cranking and cranking. And those moments in the zone are when you write probably 98% of all your useful code, and then you just keep cranking away and you look up and it's 2021. It's the year, not the time. All your credit cards have already expired. And it's awesome. That's when you do all the stuff. The trick is getting in the zone. And in fact, something I've been sort of preaching on my blog for 340 years now, is that programmers should have quiet working conditions so that they can get in the zone and they don't get knocked out of it by a salesperson taking a call or something. And that is still very rare. How many people here would say they have quiet working conditions? No, seriously, wait, there's 0? Come on, there's 1. And again, since all the productivity comes from that being in the zone, that's really something I'm still shocked about. If you want to come work for Stack Overflow, I guess I shouldn't recruit. We give you a private office, your own individual office with the door, and in fact, most of our people work from home, from wherever they may live. But the other problem is that the reason you need the quiet working conditions is it's very easy to get knocked out of the zone, but we don't really know how to get you into the zone. And tell me if this sounds familiar. This is a day of programming for me, right? Wake up in the morning, get to work, and there's like red dots on the screen. So you go into all those things and you read all the little slacks and you clear all the red dots. And then you got to check Hacker News because something important might have happened. And then you're like, hey, I heard that inbox 0 is a virtue. I'm going to get to inbox 0 right now. So you go into your email and you work on that. And then some of the red dots have come back. So now you go clear those other red dots. And then another email arrives. Now that email is one of your coworkers, and they are declining a meeting. And the meeting that they're declining is the daily scrum, which takes place every morning at 10:30. And they're declining it because they have a dentist appointment, but you have been interrupted to find out that of the 17 people that go to your morning daily scrum, one of them has a dentist appointment, and you think to yourself, why am I getting these? I'm a programmer. I can control this. I don't have to live with this particular pox. And so you go and try to figure out how to filter messages in Gmail and automatically put them in. You start Googling that, how to filter messages, you're trying to look for some regular expression that matches the calendar invites, which of course there's no documentation for calendar invites. There used to be an O'Reilly book for that kind of stuff, but not any, calendar invite message format, 650 pages. But you would never read that. And you will find on Stack Overflow, indeed, what is a good pattern that matches the Google calendar invite format that you can use to filter them, and then you sort of plug that in, only you put like a not by mistake somehow. It's like a minus, and so it deletes all your email. Now you're really in trouble, and you spend another 2 hours trying to figure out how to restore that. It's not that hard, but on Gmail, but you can. You finally get that working. You filtered the right things. It's now 10:50. Let's figure this out. What is almost lunch? 10:53 is almost lunch, right? You can't start a project. 10:52, you might still start. 10:53 and later, well, it's almost lunch. Let me just clean up a few things. I can answer a few questions on Slack. I could check the Twitter. I can do a little bit of red dot clearing, read their RSS feeds and so forth. And then literally probably just, some kind of zombie game. And then you go to lunch. Now, you get back to lunch, and what you haven't noticed is that playing the zombie game, you have pushed your keyboard under the monitor, and the monitor is now leaning on a caps lock key. So you try to log on 17 times without looking, and you lock yourself out of your account. And now you got to wait while you, again, go back to the zombie game, although there's a desert golf game. Have you played that? That's a good way to kill 300 hours. You got to wait for the guy from IT or the woman from IT to come and reset your password and let you get into your account again. And once they get there and do that and your password is reset, you think, I am never going to do this again. I'm a programmer. I don't have to put up with this shit. I'm going to remap my caps lock key to do something that I'm not a big fan of caps lock. I don't really have much use for it. So I'm going to remap it. And then, in fact, you follow all the instructions for mapping the caps lock key. It works perfectly when you're logged in, but when you're logged out, there's some other account running there, which is not your account. And so that's going to take you another few hours to figure out. Eventually, at 3:30, you've got that set. You got the caps lock key all mapped. It turns on and off the lights in your office. It's amazing. This is why it's great to be a programmer, by the way. And you finally open your IDE. You're like, I've run out of excuses. You finally open the browser and you start coding on a new project, and you're like, this font, really? I don't know about this font. It doesn't please me. And so now it's time for the great hunt for a monospace font that is going to work and that you've never seen before and that pleases you, and you find one, and it's got a dot in the middle of the zeros, and you just can't live with that. And you find another one, and you're like, you know what? I got to check the ones and the L's. I don't want the ones and the L's to look too much alike. And this one, the ones and the L's are, really just one pixel of difference. And you find another one, and it's like TrueType. And what the hell is TrueType? And then you start reading about that. And there's a new thing called OpenType. And you got to find a website somewhere that can convert TrueType to OpenType. And then it turns out that it's protected because it's Adobe. And eventually, 459, you have found the correct font, the most beautiful, amazing monospace font, and you know that you can start programming first thing tomorrow morning. So that's a day for me. Anyway, that's what I've prepared. There's a time guy here. He's given up. I got 10 minutes. So I'll take questions about stuff. And by the way, we have Stack Overflow stickers, and since this place is so clean and nice, I'm going to have to insist that you all take them and stick them somewhere in this bank. Just go into an office or a trading desk somewhere and put them on some monitors or on a bathroom entrance below the thanks. And come up afterwards if you don't get one. Just take some and pass them around.
Questions for Joel?
Programming with a cat on your lap is
Yeah.
highly overrated.
Overrated.
My last experience left me with a nice scratch.
Thanks. Yeah. Closed as not a real question. Unclear what you were asking.
Is there anything you're doing is there anything interesting that you're doing with all the data that you collect about how well people understand certain domains in programming?
Sort of. Okay, so we do this. We do an annual survey, Stack Overflow Developer Survey. You can go look for that. And the truth is, that's just a survey. There's a lot of stuff that you can get from the metadata of Stack Overflow, and we do some of that, but there's a lot of people in academia that do that. So if you just go sort of do the index searches on Stack Overflow, you'll find a ton of people that have taken, because our entire data set is Creative Commons. We make it all available as a big, gigantic, downloadable thingamajiggy. And people have done some sort of interesting things to try to tease things out of that data. I think the next level here actually is to try to do analysis of the words that people use, which I haven't seen a lot of, and I think there's a lot of richness that could come from doing research in that. But some of the data, there's a lot of useful data that we use. Some of our clients, like if clients are trying to hire developers, we can give them data on where developers are located, what skills are available where, and we can figure that out not just from the survey data, but actually the data of people that arrive on Stack Overflow with a question. And we know the tag of the question they landed on and their IP address, and that's already really, really interesting data about technology and where it's being used and by whom.
You had a couple of interesting anecdotes about the most helpful people and that sort of thing. Do you know anything about the most used answers? Like, is it how do you quit Vim or something?
Yeah, that is the number one. How do you exit Vim?
Seriously?
Yeah. Yeah, by far. Yeah. Some of them, like this question about Shanghai in 1927, has a hell of a lot of page views, but not that many. I wish I could think of some others, but there's actually the number two is I don't know Ruby. But there's an error message this is the only error message that Ruby ever gives you. It's just like almost everything in Ruby is probably a method call on a method that doesn't exist. So literally anything you do wrong in Ruby is you have not provided the method for that yet. And so that's the only error you ever get. And that is, of course, the number one thing that people will search for that will get them onto Stack Overflow in some way. There. I wish it were I wish it were easier than that. But the interesting thing about Stack Overflow is the insane long tailness of it. And the average question has something like 1,000 views, and we count them. And those are sort of real views, not like Googlebot or anything like that. And that reflects, I think, just the fact that there's just this huge distribution of problems that people actually have on the 13 million odd questions of Stack Overflow.
Hi. So you mentioned over here.
Oh.
You mentioned the influence of Stack Overflow, the millions of developers who are helped by it. Are there any ways that Stack Overflow is harmful that you're aware of and tracking?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Oh, did you want me to enumerate them? Probably the biggest problem with Stack Overflow right now is that it's the environment that it sets up tends to be antagonistic to newbies, beginners at programming, and people that don't know all the magic Stack Overflow rules, and even people that do know them but just don't appear to know them. And there is a lot of condescension. There's a lot of snark in the answers, in the comments. People are kind of rude. I don't think it goes beyond. It rarely goes beyond that. I mean, it has, but that's pretty rare. But there's this sort of snark and rudeness. Is like, are you really asking this question? And it is our belief, and I haven't seen this studied, but it would be hard not to believe that this disproportionately affects women and minorities that are then much less likely to participate on Stack Overflow, which is hurting our project of Stack Overflow and creating an amazing resource for everybody, but also maybe driving them out of the whole field of programming, which would be a social injustice and a disaster. And that's something that's really an important priority for us to work on in the next year, and we're going to be working on that. Essentially, 10 years ago, we could be naive and say, I don't know, we set up a community, it's an online community, the people talk to each other, it's not my fault. If they're snarky, I don't really know how I can police that. But with machine learning and modern technology, I think we might be able to police that. And there's actually a lot we do on Stack Overflow, and I could give not just a 1 hour talk about this. I could do like a whole week about the things that we do currently on Stack Overflow to try to shape people's behavior in ways which achieves the outcomes that we want to achieve. And so we definitely know how to do some of that behavior shaping, and we want to do some of it to make Stack Overflow less nasty and less mean to people and less off-putting to newbies and less detrimental to everybody that wants to get started in programming. And the way you can measure that, I think, is just like sort of look at the participation on Stack Overflow over the years, and I hope it goes up.
Hey, why does the highest voted answer not appear up top? Instead, the chosen answer appears.
It's just a design decision. The highest voted answer may be the best answer for the general population, but there's something magical about the answer that actually solved the problem for the person that asked the question. They may have had a question that is 5 degrees different than what everybody else is thinking about. And while the highest voted answer is an amazing resource for the world at large, if you have the exact problem expressed the exact thing, this is something that at least once has worked. So it was sort of an early design decision. I think people have probably gotten used to it. Sometimes they're frustrated when the original acceptor doesn't know what they're talking about and the entire world is upvoting that thing. And that's one of the reasons that Stack Overflow is a wiki, and so everybody has edit rights. And so if you see an actually wrong accepted answer, the correct thing to do, in my opinion, would be to edit it and add a note at the top saying, in italics, saying, this answer was accepted by the original person, but please look at the most highly voted answer because it is really much better for the person that doesn't bother scrolling down.
Thanks.
Hey, have you seen any instances of, or any interesting instances of people trying to game the system and getting as much reputation as possible without actually being helpful?
See, this is a trap question because I know you've been doing this for the last 3 weeks. And I'm going to say, no, our system is perfect. And you're going to be like, aha! Well, I did a thing. Certainly in the early days, we discovered that. The biggest one in the very, very early days is people discovered that if you post something funny, then everybody goes and reads it and they upvote it. And so they started asking joke questions. What are your favorite programmer cartoons? Or can you program in a boat? And those things got a lot of page views and a lot of upvotes, and everybody started doing, and this is essentially what Reddit has become. If you read the Reddit, especially the cute pictures of animals section of Reddit, which is all that I read because it's all I can take anymore with the current state of politics in the world. All I can really take is r/AWW. And there must be armies of robots that just go and look for things that were posted 3 months ago and got a lot of upvotes on Reddit, and then take the same picture and repost it with a randomly chosen title generated by a Markov chain thingamajiggy, and just to farm the rep. And that must be going on. I don't know of anything currently hanging on Stack Overflow. We essentially changed the rules. You can only earn 200 reputation in 1 day. That was one of those things. And we just said, hey, you can't have questions that are jokes. We're not going to have any jokes. And in fact, we now see it as a bad sign if a particular question is getting too many page views. It's probably a sign that it's intended for Reddit and not intended for Stack Overflow. And so we don't think there are ways to game the system. A lot of times, if you all remember Slashdot, again, from the time when my blood type was still common, Slashdot had this number called karma, and it was originally just intended as a mechanism so that they could detect spammers. And you would sort of lose points for doing certain things and your gain points for doing other things, and they could block spammers because they usually had low karma. And that was the original system, but eventually people started saying, hey, I want high karma, that sounds good. And it's like extra lives, I think, was the original meaning of that. And then people would say, you're a karma whore, which is a sort of an awful term. And then that was sort of reproduced among the Stack Overflow community as a reputation whore, somebody that is mining for reputation. But if you go look at what they're doing, they're answering questions, they're editing things to make them better, they're tagging things that were mistagged. There's like almost nothing that they're doing that isn't making Stack Overflow better. So for the most part, we haven't seen a lot of that.
We have time for one more question.
One more question. Yeah, this better be really good because all those other people that had questions, you're going to be responsible for.
Thanks. I'm a huge fan of Stack Overflow, but it seems to have its roots in like a very static world of posts and code snippets, and kind of grew out of a message board, right? I'm an even bigger fan, I think, of another Fog Creek product, Glitch.
Oh, yeah.
Which is this fantastic tool for teaching.
Oh, good. I
learning
haven't
and
advertised
sharing.
Glitch yet. Would you like to hear the advertisement for Glitch? Yeah.
Yeah, in a minute. But I'm curious if you think there are prospects for taking something like Glitch. There's much more about interacting with your code and experimenting and seeing how those changes work. Bringing that into the world of Stack Overflow.
Yeah, Glitch is much more social. Glitch is much more of a tool for learning and exploring and trying and playing. Stack Overflow is like not only work, but it's the kind of the high end. In some ways, we think of Stack Overflow as being the Library of Congress. It's got to be there, but it's not your neighborhood lending library. And then Glitch is sort of, you go into the Library of Congress and like, why is nobody reading to me? It's sort of like, that's not how it works. But you know, people will read to you at the Mid-Manhattan lending library, and that's sort of the positioning of Glitch. It's a different company now, technically. Stack Overflow came out of Fog Creek, is now its own company. Glitch is still at Fog Creek. It's a different company, but here's what Glitch does, by the way, if you haven't seen it. It's a social coding environment. Here's how it works. You go to Glitch, and it will make for you a little IDE, and it will make a project for you. And your project has a server side and a client side. So you've got Node on the server. You can write JavaScript up there. And the client side, you can put HTML, CSS, whatever files you want. It's just Node. It's not its own programming language or environment. Anything that, you know, whenever you have a question about how to do something, if you can find some JavaScript that does it, you can cut and paste it. It's going to work on Glitch. But Glitch has eliminated all of the hard things about programming and all of the administration nonsense that could drive you crazy. So it has no version control. There's only one version of everything. How do you collaborate with people? Well, it works like Google Docs, which is as you edit your code, it's being deployed onto the server instantaneously. Every keystroke we deploy. And everybody else that is looking at the same URL as you are, you just share it with your friends, is editing the same code. So like a Google Doc, you can edit the code with a group of people at the same time, and it's all getting deployed continuously. And if that bothers you, then you're a professional programmer and you're not the intended audience. So how do you collaborate with people? It's like Google Docs style. How do you go backwards in time? There's a little slider. You drag it to the left, and your project goes backwards in time. But there isn't like a whole lot of version control. You don't have to learn Git. You don't have to learn how to deploy. You don't have to get a URL. We give you a URL. You don't have to figure out how to do DNS and bind and how to make an account on Amazon and how to deploy an EC2 server and blah, 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 blah. You don't have to do any of that stuff. You just go to glitch.com, and you're writing code. And in fact, an even easier thing than that is go find somebody that's already done a Glitch project that is 50, 60, 70% of what you want, and it'll have a button that says Remix, and you click Remix, and now you got your own personal copy of that project. All the source code has been copied, and it's your own version, and you can do whatever you want with your version of it. And so you can sort of remix other people's code. Then there's a nice little button where you can raise your hand if you need help. And there's a bunch of volunteers that will dive in, and they'll dive into your editing environment with you and help you when you get stuck. So I think of it as sort of the much more friendly, beginner-oriented version. But also, a quick statistic about Stack Overflow. We have 50 million humans a month that come and visit Stack Overflow. And near as we can tell, there are only 16 million programmers in the world. So the other 34 million people that are on Stack Overflow all the time asking questions are coding, but they don't want to be, and it's not their job. And think about that. It could be people that are learning. It could be people that are accountants that are writing VBA. It could be scientists analyzing data. It could be people that just want to put up a website for their restaurant. There's a lot of value to being able to write code in the world. And sort of that larger group of people that have to write code, but it's not their full-time job, do not have time to learn about your Git, and they don't need to. They don't have time to try to figure out, deployment scripts that work in all environments. They don't need to think about any of that complicated stuff, and Glitch just whacks away at all that and gives you the world's simplest programming environment for making web apps. So with that said, I hope that was less than one sentence, and that we still have time. But definitely check out glitch.com and play around with it. I think it's going to be really cool. All right. Well, I'm out of time. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming.